Hi everybody, my name is Casey. Welcome to my channel to those of you who are new, and welcome back to those who have been here before. So recently, we spoke about the lyricist and librettist Oscar Hammerstein II and mentioned a few of his prominent works. Being such a prominent lyricist, we've already discussed his groundbreaking works Showboat and Oklahoma following conversations about two of his collaborators, Jerome Kern and Richard Rodgers, respectively. But Oscar Hammerstein II was such a pivotal figure in musical theater history. There's one more show really worth a deeper dive into at this point in time, and that's Carousel. Carousel is known for its innovative integration of dark and complex themes like redemption, domestic abuse, and hope into musical theater. It is profound in its emotional depth, and memorable songs like You'll Never Walk Alone and If I Loved You have cemented its status as a timeless classic that really influenced the storytelling and thematic ambitions of subsequent musicals. It was ultimately a major milestone in helping to define the genre as we know it today and laid the groundwork for darker musicals like Sondheim's Sweeney Todd to gain popularity. Let's dive in. Carousel is a musical by Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein II in 1945, and it's set in a coastal New England town in the late 19th century, revolving around the tumultuous romance between the carousel barker Billy Bigelow and millworker Julie Jordan. The musical explores themes of love, redemption, and the consequences of one's actions. Some key plot points include kind of the initial opening where Billy is a carousel barker and Julie Jordan is working at the mill, and they meet and they fall in love despite their differing social backgrounds. Billy is brash and impulsive, while Julie is a bit more reserved, but deeply in love with him. Then ultimately they get married, and struggles ensue. Although they marry, their relationship faces challenges again and again due to Billy's temper and his inability to hold a steady job. They expect a child, adding to the pressure of their strained financial situation. Then things take a tragic turn when Billy becomes desperate and agrees to participate in a robbery planned by his friend. Of course, the robbery goes awry, and Billy dies while trying to escape capture by the police, leaving Julie completely alone and pregnant to care for their future child. Then the musical transitions into the afterlife, where Billy is given the chance to return to Earth for one day to redeem himself and help his daughter, who faces challenges due to her father's reputation. Billy's attempt to connect with his daughter Louise and provide guidance leads to a poignant resolution. The musical ultimately ends with Julie and Louise finding solace and hope in each other's love, despite the hardships they've faced. Now that we know a little bit about what happened in this musical, let's talk about the historical context, right? There is a lot to unpack here since this was a period piece at the time it was released. So, when Carousel premiered on Broadway in 1945, it was against the backdrop of some really significant historical events and changes in America. Of course, you can't say 1945 without mentioning the war. It was a period marked by intense global conflict and sacrifice. Audiences were grappling with the aftermath of the war and seeking entertainment that offered some emotional resonance and hope. While there was a lot of post-war optimism, there was also a lot of uncertainty. And so the post-war era was really characterized by this mixture of optimism for the future and uncertainty about the transition to peacetime. Carousel, with its themes of love, redemption, and resilience, really resonated with audiences that were looking for stories that really reflected human spirit amid adversity. Now, there was also a lot of social and economic transformation. The 1940s marked a period of major social and economic transformation in America, with industrialization and urbanization continuing to reshape communities, while the GI Bill and other post-war policies really fueled economic growth and societal changes. Carousel also premiered amongst a lot of cultural shifts. There were so many changing cultural norms and values at that time. The musical's exploration of themes such as domestic violence, redemption, and social class resonated with audiences grappling with changing moral and ethical standards in a post-war society. There's also context within musical theater that was really essential to the show. Broadway itself was really evolving as a cultural hub. The Rodgers and Hammerstein partnership, established with Oklahoma in 1943, really started transforming musical theater by integrating plot, character, and song in innovative ways. Carousel continued this trend, pushing boundaries with its deeper emotional and thematic content. Again, if you really look at Carousel, really look at it, it is a very dark show. Again, considering it was 1945. They had to rewrite this to, be less dark at the end. Anyways. As the second collaboration between Rodgers and Hammerstein, Carousel really did solidify their reputation as the masters of the American musical theater. Their work not only entertained audiences, but challenged them to really confront complex issues and emotions. The historical context of the show being released and having its first performance in 1945 really, again, focused on the post-war reflections and cultural evolution as well as Broadway innovation. The musical's themes and characters really provided audiences with a poignant exploration of the human experience amid a changing world, ensuring its massive impact on American musical theater. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at the historical context surrounding the release of this musical, let's look at what was happening at the time of the musical's setting, right? Because this one is interesting because both the time of the release of the show and the setting of the musical are both really important in understanding what was going on with the show. So, Carousel, again, is performed in a very specific historical context that really shapes its characters and themes. And so it's reflecting on the social and economic realities of late 19th century America. Things like industrialization and urbanization, right? The late 19th century was really the rise of the Industrial Revolution. Major industrialization and urbanization was happening in America, and while Carousel is set in a coastal New England town rather than a bustling city, the effects of industrialization are completely evident in the characters' lives. Julie Jordan and her fellow mill workers really represent the working class, often struggling with low wages and poor working conditions. Again, remembering that this original context was being put in front of a 1945 post-war era audience, they had a lot to resonate with that because they were in the middle of also facing major economic and social changes. And so they could really relate to this time period of the Industrial Revolution. They could also relate to the characters' financial struggles and slow financial success of other characters that were more minor, since again, they had just lived through the Great Depression and the war, and had new opportunities available to them all of a sudden, but retained a decent amount of uncertainty for the future. The musical also portrays a stark division between social classes in the late 19th century. Again, Billy Bigelow is a Carousel barker, and he represents the lower class, a transient lifestyle that really contrasted with Julie's more stable but economically constrained existence as a mill worker. The economic pressures and inequalities of the time were really palpable in their struggles to make ends meet. The original 1945 audience, again, was in their initial post-war period, and they had an increased awareness and discussion about social inequalities and economic disparities. And the differences between Billy's lower class status and Julie's economically constrained life as a mill worker really highlighted these issues and prompted audiences to really reflect on the major economic issues facing the country. Audiences could really empathize with both of these major characters who represented different facets of the working class. Their struggles to make ends meet and to navigate societal expectations really mirrored these experiences of many audience members, fostering a sense of connection and empathy. Gender roles were another significant piece of the historical context of Carousel's setting. Julie Jordan really embodies the stereotypical role of a woman in the late 19th century: nurturing, dutiful, reliant on her husband's income. While Billy's inability to provide that stability challenges traditional gender expectations and reflected broader societal changes in the late 19th century as women just started to seek a little more autonomy and independence. Both sides of this would have really resonated with an audience in 1945, as many women had stepped up to fill jobs left behind by men who fought in the war. But in the post-war era, many of these same women returned to a life a little more closely aligned with the gender roles embodied by Julie Jordan and Carousel. Their departure from the workplace mirrored how Julie felt as she left the mill upon marrying Billy, and her reliance on him really resonated with how they were now also, again, fully dependent on their husband's income. The musical also explores prevalent cultural and moral values of the time. Themes, again, of redemption, forgiveness, and moral responsibility are central to Billy's journey. His actions and their consequences are scrutinized against a backdrop of evolving societal norms and moral standards. The cultural and moral values of the late 19th century, in many ways, were very similar to the emphasis on morality present in the mid-40s. After all, just a decade prior, the Hays Code went into effect, severely censoring what was allowed in film. In the mid-1940s, this was still in full swing, with media being really forced to appeal to core cultural values. This is just one example of the larger societal focus on morality at the time. The consequences each character faced for their actions would have been considered much more palatable and actually would have been considered almost inevitable to the audience. Inevitable. In the late 19th century, there was also a major emphasis on rural versus urban dynamics. Now, Carousel was set in a small coastal town, but while it featured rural simplicity, you were continuing to see these urban influences creeping in that mirrored the time of the Industrial Revolution. Again, the carousel itself in the show symbolizes a fleeting escape from everyday struggles, offering a nostalgic glimpse into simpler times amidst a changing world. The point about rural versus urban dynamics in Carousel would have been particularly important for audiences in 1945 for a few reasons. Again, with a post-war audience, audiences were grappling with the realities of urbanization and further industrialization, which often led to nostalgia for simpler rural lifestyles. The portrayal of a coastal town and the carousel as a nostalgic escape really resonated with those audiences longing for a connection to a more idyllic and less hectic time. The contrast between the rural and the urban areas really also reflected broader debates about American cultural identity at the time. So, once again, the country was shifting from very agricultural roots to having these industrial centers. And many questioned the impact of progress on traditional values and community cohesion. Carousel tapped into these concerns by depicting a community that was struggling to balance tradition with being modern. Many audience members likely had personal or family ties to a more rural life, making these themes of rural versus urban dynamics particularly poignant. The portrayal of characters navigating these dynamics offered a really relatable lens with which audiences could explore their own experiences and perspectives. Now that we have an understanding of the historical context behind the musical and how it fit both into the historical context of the setting and of the time it was performed, let's look also where the source material comes from. Ultimately, in the case of Carousel, the similarities and differences between the musical and the source material becomes strangely important when understanding the musical. Carousel the musical is based on the 1909 play Lilem by Hungarian playwright Ferenc Molnár. Carousel the musical is based on the 1909 play Lilem. Lilem was a popular and influential work in its time, exploring themes of love, redemption, and the complexities of human relationships. So let's look at some elements on how Lilem was adapted into Carousel. First up, let's look at some of the core information from the settings and characters. Ultimately, in both Lilem and Carousel, the setting is with working class characters, right? There's the main character who works at a carousel. And so Billy in Carousel is called Lilem in Lilem. So the name is a little bit different. There's still a character that is basically very similar to Julie. But again, there are slight differences in the backgrounds and relationships in the musical adaptation versus the original play. The themes are also very similar through the two pieces. There's still the themes of love, redemption, moral consequences, and they are central to both works. The relationship between Billy and Julie, as well as the repercussions of Billy's actions, are truly explored deeply in both Lilem and Carousel. Then we get to a fantasy element. And so both shows incorporate this fantastical or supernatural element. In Lilem ultimately encounters celestial figures after his death, where in Carousel, Billy interacts with a star keeper who then offers him a chance at redemption by returning to Earth for one day. This difference will become more important in a minute. And there's also a cultural difference between the two pieces as well, because while Lilem is set in Budapest and reflects Hungarian society and culture in the early 20th century, Carousel relocates the story to a coastal New England town in the late 19th century, really adapting the setting and cultural context to more closely resonate with American audiences in 1945. Now, of course, another major difference is that obviously Carousel has music, while Lilem is a play. But it's interesting how the music does, again, work to really enhance and develop the story in a little bit different way than the play is able to do. Now, there is something that is really important to know. The ending of Lilem versus Carousel are significantly different. So in Lilem, again, is a carousel barker who becomes involved in a robbery to provide for his lover Julie and their unborn child. And just like Billy Bigelow in Carousel, Lilem tragically dies during the robbery attempt. But Lilem takes a much darker turn. So in the afterlife and judgment portion of Lilem, he finds himself in purgatory, and it's defined as purgatory, And he's met and judged by these celestial figures. And then in Carousel, it's just a star keeper Billy runs into. And in Lilim, his life on Earth is fully reviewed. And he's found guilty on so many different things and failing to fulfill his responsibilities. And so this difference makes Carousel a much more ambiguous show than the high stakes in Lilim. Because again, in Carousel, they kind of graze over it. It's like, here's a chance to redeem yourself. Go be awesome for a day. We need your help. Versus Lilim, where it's like, yeah, you are guilty, you did bad things, and now you're going to pay for it, but I guess you can try to do something. And so there's the redemption attempt, and despite his flaws and mistakes, Lilim in the original play is also given the opportunity to return to Earth for a day, just like Billy and Carousel. But in Lilim, his attempt to provide guidance and support to Julie and their daughter Louise is very clearly fraught with difficulty and has a clear failing in the ending, where in Carousel, it intentionally remains ambiguous. So when you look at the two shows, there was a bit more hope added to Carousel, whereas in Lilim, it was just straight up dark. And so Carousel initially was going to be darker, but they didn't think that audiences could handle that level of dark in a musical. And so they toned it back and made it ambiguous. But when you look at the original source material and see they didn't really change. They changed the ending to Carousel, but they didn't say that what happened in Lilim didn't happen. They just made it unclear. So when you look at the original source material for Carousel, you get a completely different takeaway from what happened in the ending. You get a completely different view of how dark this musical really is. And that's why, more than many pieces, the source material for Carousel is so integral to understanding Carousel as a musical. Like I like to say, no musicals without its controversy. I find it interesting that despite the steps and strides Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein II took to intentionally take this dark play and make it a more ambiguous and hopeful ending, the ending of Carousel still remains one of the most controversial and discussed aspects of the musical. It's absolutely crazy. And it just is leaving the audience to interpret what happens at the end with a nice little song giving a little bit of closure. The original ending of Carousel really divided audiences and critics. Some found it to be emotionally resonant and appreciated the exploration of redemption and forgiveness, while others felt it was straight up too ambiguous and really a lot of people struggled with the idea of sympathizing with a flawed character like Billy at the time, which is interesting in and of itself, right? Like, yeah, the guy has his flaws, but like, if you look at it from today, how many of us love anti-hero stories? Like, dude was trying. He at least was trying at the end. He had it was like a case of like good intentions, bad result. And people in 1945 were like, nah, bruh, he is like awful. We don't want to like him. Which I think that's interesting. Like, interesting cultural shift. Anyways, there have also been many revivals and adaptations. And so as Carousel has aged, there have been experiments with different endings where some productions have kept the original ambiguous ending, where some have added some more definitive resolutions for Billy's character, or really altered the narrative focus so that it didn't feel so up in the air at the end. There was also several different major adaptations, right? So one is the 1956 film adaptation. And so this is one of the ones that I've seen personally that really made me fall in love with Carousel. And so the 1956 film adaptation was directed by Henry King, starring Gordon McRae as Billy and Shirley Jones as Julie Jordan, and largely followed the original Broadway ending, where Billy dies during a robbery attempt, given a second chance to return to Earth, helps his daughter, and then the ending stays really close to the musical's really ambiguous and emotional resolution. So then you've got the 1994 Broadway revival, and this featured a completely altered ending that really aimed to provide a little more closure. And so in this version, Billy's spirit is seen really guiding his daughter Louise as she grows up and ultimately becomes a strong, independent woman. And so this ending really emphasizes Louise's journey and empowerment with less focus on Billy's redemption. Then there was a 2009 Broadway revival. And so this revival returned to a more traditional interpretation of the original ending, and again maintained the ambiguity and emotional complexity of Billy's return to Earth, his attempts to help his daughter Louise, and really leaves the ending still open to interpretation and emphasizes the themes of forgiveness and redemption. Then there's more adaptations and productions. There are so many, I could not describe every single one. There have been many regional, international productions, and a lot of them have also continued to experiment with different endings, sometimes again altering the narrative focus entirely or providing clear resolutions for Billy's character. Some have really emphasized Louise's perspective and growth, while others have really explored Billy's journey more deeply. There is such a level of differences in the adaptation of this show. This is part of the reason we're talking about this today, right? Like, it's crazy how different adaptations are getting. And it just leads us to remember the importance of the impact and legacy of the show as a whole, right? Despite its controversy, the original ending really contributed to the musical's enduring legacy. Whether you love it, whether you hate it, it made it relevant. It's like YouTube comments, right? Doesn't matter if you say something nice or you say something terrible, the algorithm loves it. So don't forget to comment. Regardless, the show still has thought-provoking explorations of love, redemption, and consequences. And there is such complexity in Billy's character and his journey towards redemption that continues to fascinate and challenge audiences to this day. Having an ambiguous ending really allowed for artistic innovation in Carousel, because it then expanded the boundaries of what musical theater could achieve. Audiences were not walking into shows at that point in any way, shape, or form prepared to see an actually dark show. And so leaving the ending ambiguous actually allowed the show to reach greater levels of success than it would have with a fully dark ending. And it allowed for future shows like Sondheim is some of the next darkest shows progressively in history. You got Sweeney Todd, you got Assassins. None of those would be possible without Carousel. And I mean, come on, Sweeney Todd is like super popular. That level of popularity for a dark show would not have been possible without a darker show like Carousel gaining mass popularity. And again, Carousel could only do that because it was on its way to becoming a darker show with an ambiguous ending. And it completely, again, expanded what themes were possible in musical theater. It expanded what audiences would find acceptable. It changed expectations of what theater could be. And it also had this level of emotional depth that was absolutely shocking and revolutionary for the time. Because with a bit of a darker show, it enabled the musical to really explore some deeper nuances and some really deeper, very human aspects of these characters. It really, again, it features a prominent anti-hero. That was not popular in the 1940s. This was an early example of a show of a popular show with an anti-hero. And it grapples with issues of like self-worth, his desire to be a better person. Again, good intentions, bad results. And this depth of character paved the way for future musicals and honestly paved the way for the emergence of anti-heroes and acceptance of anti-heroes in other media. Of course, there was also a major impact on musical form and structure. And so Carousel contributed to the evolution of musical form by, again, like Oklahoma, seamlessly integrating the song, dance, and narrative. And so the musical structure really blended the dialogue and musical numbers in such a beautiful way to advance the plot and develop the characters. It became a model for future productions seeking to be cohesive, but tell these emotionally resonant stories through music. Upon its premiere, Carousel was critically acclaimed for its music, storytelling, and performances. It won multiple Tony Awards, including Best Musical, and songs such as If I Loved You and You'll Never Walk Alone became instant classics. The musical's popularity continued again in revivals and adaptations that underscore its enduring appeal. The themes in Carousel, of course, are also still relevant today and continue to resonate with audiences. I mean, love, forgiveness, social class, the impact of one's actions on others, these are still things we are talking about today. How many pop songs talk about love? Like, there's so much, okay, how much of social media is talking about like either forgiveness or boundaries? Like that's literally forgiveness or like the impact of one's actions. You remove yourself, that's boundaries. It's what we're talking about these days online. That's a theme there. Like not boundaries as boundaries, but like the impact of your actions on other people. And like social class, I don't think there's ever going to be an era that we do not talk about social class seriously. Anyways, the musical's portrayal of these complex relationships and moral dilemmas really prompts discussion about redemption, empathy, and the human condition, and helps it remain relevant across generations. It's relevant now. It's going to be relevant in 10 years. It's going to be relevant in 100 years. This is the type of show that dives deep enough with broad enough themes that the relevance will never go away. It also, of course, left a legacy on popular culture. It influenced films, adaptations, references in other media, and its impact on musical theater scholarship and education ensures that the themes and innovations continue to be studied and appreciated by aspiring artists and audiences alike. In summary, the importance of Carousel extends way beyond its initial success on Broadway. It has that enduring popularity, that enduring influence on musical theater as a whole. Through its exploration of complex characters and themes, innovative storytelling techniques, and emotional resonance, Carousel has really secured its place as a timeless classic and a cornerstone of the American theatrical canon. All in all, Carousel was a Rodgers and Hammerstein show based on the play Lillian that premiered in Broadway in 1945 with an incredible level of depth, complexity, and was outrageously dark for 1945. It's fascinating how it compares to the source material and how it's continued to impact media today, honestly. At the time, it also had innovative choreography and incredibly iconic songs. It had a decent amount of critical acclaim and multiple Tony Awards, but really, its impact on musical form and character development has been profound and influenced subsequent generations to come. The musical's enduring legacy really lies in its ability to provoke introspection on morality and empathy, ensuring its relevance now and in future decades to come. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you want to see more content on basically the composers and shows and the history behind what led to the Disney movie musical. And hit that bell for notifications so you can see it. But in the meantime, like, what were your thoughts on Carousel's ending and alternate endings? Like, do you have a take? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.